Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Jacob Shapiro podcast. I am rejoined on the show today by Akshar Patel. He is the brain behind the Emissary.co, which is a really interesting online resource about India. I love it. It's a very particular viewpoint, but I've learned a lot from it, and I've learned a lot from Akshar. Let me start before we get into the meat of the podcast to say we've got a potential war between Pakistan and India brewing. Neither Pakistan nor India are my area of expertise necessarily. This is the type of thing where I identified it as extremely important as soon as that terrorist attack happened last week, and I've been trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible. So we're going to have a few different voices on the podcast here over the next couple of weeks. I actually had intended to have a Pakistani analyst on this particular episode. We were going to lead with a Pakistani analyst and then go to Akshar's analysis, and then we'd have further conversations going forward. But our Pakistani analyst had to cancel at the last minute due to a death in his family. So we're just going to put out Akshar's sort of Indian perspective on this. We're going to have some other follow-up content on this going forward. I'm giving this preamble in part because we are wading into a very hot button topic. I'm already anticipating the hate mail from both sides and on YouTube and on everything else. So I am here trying to give some perspectives and actually learn myself. You can even hear in this episode, I'm asking questions that may seem relatively unsophisticated. That's not just for the listener's benefit. It's also because I'm trying to check my assumptions and get in here, and I'm inviting you along with my process to understand where we're at. So with all of that said, if you want to write about anything you heard in this podcast, especially if you're Pakistani or Indian, you can write to me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the episode. I thought it was a very open and forthright conversation. Take care of the people that you love. Cheers, and see you out there. Our old friend Akshar from the Emissary is here to talk to us. Akshar, it's good to see you, and I wish we were talking under better circumstances. I guess it's never good when a terrorist attack and death and carnage brings two friends together, but it's always nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I had a blast last time, so I'm sure it'll be great this time too.
I hope so. So we're recording here. It's Wednesday, April 30th. It's 9:37 a.m. Central Time here in the United States. Akshar is coming to us from the UK. You've got Pakistani officials declaring that they have intelligence that an Indian military operation is imminent within the next 24 to 36 hours. I think we will get this out before any sort of military operation. Narendra Modi apparently gave operational freedom to India's military to carry out whatever operations they needed to. But before we get into this, Akshar, I have a feeling that a large group of my listeners, even though they are, if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably somewhat of a nerd, or at least more turned on to international affairs than most people. But it's hard to sift through all of the drama coming out of the White House right now. So maybe we should just start at the very top, at what happened. So obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong. So what happened here was that, so last week, April 23rd, 26 people were killed in Kashmir in a terrorist attack. It's a group, or at least the group that claimed responsibility is not a group that I'm familiar with. It's some kind of Kashmir resistance group. And I've read that they are associated to a Pakistani militant group. They're not. Like, it's been very hard to sort of parse through. Mm-hmm. But the Indian reaction has been pretty strong. And when I say pretty strong, I mean India has suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. That's a treaty that governs water distribution between India and Pakistan that was originally negotiated by the World Bank. It has survived multiple India-Pakistani wars. And apparently it's not going to survive whatever just happened. I mean, 3 different wars this treaty has been able to live through. And India has already suspended it. Pakistan has said that in itself is an act of war. So maybe just sort of at the top, Akshar, tell us, like, from your point of view, like what happened, and what have you been able to find out what happened? Because I go on Pakistani news and it's all a false flag operation, and India is just using this as an excuse to do things. And India is like, oh, well, this is Pakistan, maybe backed by nefarious forces in China trying to upend the status quo. Tell me, sort of from your neutral position, what do you think actually happened? Like, what do you think is going on here?
So obviously, I'm Indian origin, but I will keep it as neutral as possible. So from the Indian perspective, what was seen is there was a terrorist attack in Indian Kashmir, and it was done by, I think, 3 or 4 people. There's pictures of them. 2 are said to be Pakistani, 2 are said to be local Kashmiri, or maybe local Indian. I need to see the exact data, but that's basically what it is claimed. The terror attack, the reason it caused a lot of outrage is because of the nature of the attack. First, it was towards civilians. I think a lot of other terror attacks, if they've been big, they've been towards like military personnel or security forces. Sometimes they'll attack people from, say, who are not from Kashmir, other Indians who might move in, especially recently after they lifted. And we could get into this maybe later, but after they lifted a lot of the special privileges in Kashmir, a lot of investment as well as people started coming into Kashmir. And this changed the dynamics of it. Before, if you weren't Kashmiri, you couldn't go in and purchase land. The reverse is true, though. Like a Kashmiri could go to Bombay and purchase land. There's a bunch of other special provisions they had, but that was removed. And now you see a lot more non-locals moving there for work. Many times it's like petty work, especially a lot of these poorer laborers. You also see investment happening at this place. I think it's called Pahalgam. This was these were tourists, basically. These people came from all these different parts of India. And there is a booming tourism industry happening in Kashmir now because of these special restrictions lifted. Because relatively, if you look at the data, ever since they removed these special restrictions, it was an article called 370 in 2019. There has been a lot less civilian deaths, security personnel deaths. I don't know about terrorist deaths. I think even terrorist deaths have gone down, or militant deaths, depending on how you want to label it. But overall, it has become more peaceful, despite this terrorist attack. Now, back to this attack, why it was so outrageous. Not only were these civilians or tourists, but the terrorists did something that was very religiously colored. They basically asked each tourist, there was a group of these people, they asked them, hey, what's your name? Let us see your ID. And this is kind of graphic. Some of them, if not all of them, they were checked if they were circumcised, because non-Muslim people aren't circumcised in India. And then I think they were also asked to recite this thing called the kalma, which is basically Muslim proclamation to, I don't know, faith or prayer, or just dedication to God. If they couldn't, then they were kind of killed. One of them was Hindu, and he could recite it. So he was spared. In all, I think 26 people were killed. I think 24 of them were Hindu. One was Christian. One Muslim was also killed, and it was reported the Muslim was a local who tried to defend these tourists from the terrorists, and that's why they killed him. Some people say he was Shia Muslim, so he wasn't Sunni, so they killed him because of that. But I don't know, but you could kind of see the very religious coloring behind this terrorist attack. So that triggered and outraged a lot of people in India. And I think in general, this proxy war, this conflict that's happened between India and Pakistan, where like we know for years, if not decades, Pakistan has been, funding these militants or terrorists in Kashmir, these rebels, because they want to see Kashmir either join Pakistan or be independent, but more so join Pakistan. They just want to kind of screw over India. That's just like a geopolitical goal. So we know this has happened for a long time. There's a lot of evidence that happened, these links between Pakistan right now. So that's why there's a bunch of flare up on the Indian side. And I think that is India's, concentrated perspective. Now, there's a lot of context. Like we could go into why they suspended the Indus Water Treaty, or just, I don't know, even how Pakistan is reacting or how India is reacting, because there's been a lot of shifts since like prior periods of conflict. And I think there are some context and reasons for that, which are more zoomed out.
Yes, and I mean this is one of these topics too, where I mean we could spend 3 hours talking about the context. Like, how far do you want to go back? Do you want to go back to the Sikh Empire? Do you want to go back to the princely state under the British control of India? Do you want to go back to partition? Like China also claims parts of this region, which were not originally Kashmir, but now are part of the larger. I mean, there's just sort of so much to disentangle there. Before we try and take a step back and try and at least find the context that will allow listeners to explain things, I'm curious from your point of view, why do you think Pakistan would do this? Or do you think that the Pakistani government or that elements in the Pakistani government would do this? Because I take your point that Pakistan wants to mess around with India. That's in part because Pakistan can't beat India. It's like demonstrably weaker than India. So all it can really do is fire pot shots. But this one is also weird because I alluded to this, but you've got this group called the Kashmir Resistance, which
TRF,
originally
yeah.
went on social media and claimed responsibility, then said, no, we got hacked. We're not responsible.
Yeah.
You've got, Indian think tanks saying, oh, well, these guys are connected to Lashkar-e-Taiba and like all these other different Pakistani militant groups. Whereas the Pakistanis are like, look, like we didn't do this. Like this is India sort of pushing forward. So if you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone in Pakistan, like, is there a reason for Pakistan to do this? Because it's not like things are going well for them. The economy sucks. The government is trying to deal with all these different things to satisfy the IMF and other sorts of things like that. You had JD Vance visiting India around this time. The last thing you want to do is push the United States even further into India's corner. So I'm having trouble. I'm not saying that the Pakistanis are right about the false flag operation, but it is hard to like, why would Pakistan push this? So do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so starting with the TRF thing, I think they call it the Resistance Force or something, the Kashmir Resistance thing. I think this is just like a rebranding, which you see a lot of times, or like a splinter group. More so a rebranding, which you see amongst militant groups or terrorist groups. So that's the Indian perspective. I personally, yes, I'm neutral, but I also believe this. And in terms of why Pakistan is doing this, I think it's actually a good opportune time. The reason being is the Pakistani economy is bad, but if you see, like, I think I recently saw their inflation rates. Now they've had double-digit inflation for a couple years, but now it's going down. That doesn't mean like the average life of a Pakistani isn't really tough or terrible. It still is. Inflation is baked in. It's not like prices are going in a total opposite direction, but it's going down. So for the government, it's like, hey, it's not really obvious that we're distracting from this now. Like the economy is slightly getting better. We have some breathing room. Okay, now maybe we could do something and we're not going to be like cynically blamed, like, oh, you're just trying to distract from the, economic malaise. The second facet of this is, and this is the more dire facet, in Pakistan's western and northern regions, the western regions are dominated by this group called the Balochis. And the northwest is dominated by this group called the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns share ethnic origins with the Taliban. So there's a lot of Pashtuns along this border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, along this place called the Durand Line. Now, Afghan governments pre-Taliban, and when the Taliban took over, they don't really recognize this Durand Line. And they have ethnic solidarity with these Pashtun people because they're the same ethnicity. And there's this idea brewing in Pakistan. And I say brewing because it's been there for a while, but recently what's been happening is there's been a lot of, militant or terrorist attacks. Again, these Balochi and Pashtun rebels really just killing Pakistani militants, Pakistani army personnel, sabotaging infrastructure, and just causing a huge, huge headache. I think every week, or at least definitely every month, you'll hear of a terror attack or militant attack in Balochistan or these northwest frontier provinces. But the reason this is happening is because these regional groups, they feel that they're being shortchanged. Basically, the Pakistani military and the establishment is mostly built of this ethnic group called Punjabis. Now, there are Punjabis in India too, but there's a lot more Punjabis in Pakistan. And they have a total vice grip over pretty much all facets of the government branches, military especially. Pretty much every aspect of Pakistani state and society is dominated by this ethnic group, which also form the majority. Now, these Balochis and these Pashtuns, they feel that they're kind of being, oppressed or swindled by a lot of these Punjabis and just the Pakistan establishment at large. So you're starting to see an increase in these, rebel attacks. The Taliban, for really strange reasons, which I don't totally grasp, Pakistan helped establish the Taliban, after America left, but it quickly turned on them. And this is kind of the fallout we see now, where the Taliban sponsors cross-border attacks or helps these Pashtun rebels. And basically all along the north and the west, of Pakistan, it's, these fires are being lit. There's a real element of rebellion or just, rebel attacks that haven't been seen as much in the past to this level. So I think it's those twin factors where it's like, hey, we have these rebel attacks on our north and west. We haven't been able to quell it as much as we should, for whatever reason. And at the same time, we're doing a bit better economically. We're not still all that well. But maybe we could, fund this type of attack and kind of unite the country behind us and really, save their basically save their position at the top. I think a lot of Pakistani politics, like one fact is no Pakistani prime minister has finished a term. It's usually ended by the military. So the military has a lot of these tactics or ways. They've been very efficient to kind of keep power. And the last thing I will say this, and I'm saying this as an Indian, Pakistani people are super resilient. They're extremely, extremely resilient. Some people may say they're numb to a lot of like the bad stuff that has happened. I know some Pakistani people have told me that, but when you really look at it from an outside point of view, they're extremely resilient. And I think in this type of moment, they might double down on that resilience or numbness or whatever you want to call it in a bid to kind of keep this country going and keep these military in power at the same time.
Okay. I'm not sure I buy it, but that's better than I could come up with myself. And Kamran is coming on the podcast next week to talk about this, and I can't wait to quiz him and hear about all the 13th century developments that are critical to understanding the current moment. All right, well, let's try and get some context here. And please feel free to shift the context as I try to ask you things. But one of the things that seems to me, or one of the things that strikes me, is the Indian government response compared to previous incidents that are roughly similar. And I think you did a good job of talking about some of the things that are different here, the way that it was religiously tinged. I think the fact that there isn't a sort of verifiable claim of responsibility may also be driving some of this as well. But, I was looking back at the 2008 Mumbai attacks. That was actually one of the first things I was really aware of in my career. I remember Stratfor was buzzing about the 2008 Mumbai attacks. And then also in 2019, you had the Pulwama attack. And the reason I bring those up is because 2008, the Mumbai attacks were awful. Compared to, all suffering is suffering. But, what happened in Mumbai in 2008 was orders of magnitude worse, whether it's the number of people that died. It was, I think, over 175 or something like that. It was, at the time, I remember it was sort of referenced in the context of 9/11, things like that. It was really bad. And you didn't have a hardcore Indian military response or anything like that. You had India say a bunch of strongly worded things, and they went after the perpetrators, and it was an international thing. But like you didn't have the prospect of war between India and Pakistan. In 2019, and to your point, 2019 was an attack on a convoy of vehicles that were carrying Indian security personnel on one of these highways in this part of the world, killed roughly 40 people. You had I wouldn't call it a war. You had some skirmishing after the fact. Pakistan actually shot down an Indian jet at one point and captured the pilot, and then there was a whole thing about the release of the pilot and going back together. All of which is to say, though, it was fairly contained. There were pot shots back and forth, but it wasn't like we're gearing up for war. And it seems very different this time. And my first instinct would have been, to your point, okay, this is more religiously tinged. Modi is the leader of the Hindu nationalists, like he has to make a statement here. But that was true in 2019, and he was willing to de-escalate. And things have been kind of okay between Pakistan and India. So I don't really know how to explain why India, I get why this is so upsetting, but why the Indian government is saying, okay, we're going to suspend this water treaty. The military, you are cleared to go hot. Like, we are withdrawing our diplomats. This is not okay. Like, the gloves are off. Like, it seems like a markedly and qualitatively different response. Am I misinterpreting it? Is there something else going on here? I'm trying to understand why the difference.
So when it comes to '08, Congress government, especially of that time, was a different beast. I can't really explain why they did basically nothing. I think it's just ineptitude. So we'll just leave it at that, and some domestic considerations in terms of some communal stuff. But in general, I think it was just ineptitude. 2019, the reason that they escalated or they de-escalated really quickly is some people pin it on, like, I think Trump back then he helped. I don't know if that's the case. But I just think that India kind of achieved its strategic objective then in one way, in that it kind of established, like, hey, we know you guys have a nuclear deterrence, but we're willing to, bomb a terror camp or whatever, some land on your side. We're willing to use our air force. Now, here's the controversial part where I don't think you'll hear it in a lot of Indian perspectives, especially those from the military or government background, because they can't say this. Modi doesn't trust the Indian military like that in terms of performance. The Indian
Hmm.
military has a lot of back end issues in terms of it has had troubles in terms of procurement. It has been kind of, wrapped around with red tape in terms of bureaucracy. There's a lot of rentier aspects when it comes to, you know, um, like these generals or these military officials who make money off of these defense deals and X, Y, and Z. So the military itself in India, and this is kind of a nascent idea that's coming to fore, a lot of people aren't as confident in its abilities as prior. And in 2019, that was kind of, laid bare. When it
Hmm.
came to, I think the exact maneuver was basically like Pakistani airplanes came into Indian airspace, did like a feigned retreat. The pilots kind of chased him, and then he got shot down. At the same time, I think there was a helicopter or something around this time, not exactly the same time, but there was a helicopter with Indian soldiers that was shot down by Indians. And I could give you even more lists like this. And I mean, I probably should. Like, you will hear these news stories in the Himalayas, and it's hilarious. It's macabre in a way. It's sad, but you see these stories, and the headlines are Indian soldiers have been surprised at like Galwan or this Himalayan pass by Chinese soldiers, and so this has happened since 2019 up till now, and I think Modi himself, as well as a lot of the government officials, the political center, they've lost a lot of faith in the Indian military, and I think there is, a very bellicose response in terms of diplomatic maneuvers, like, taking their diplomats out of Pakistan, or like this Indus Water Treaty, which is another thing we should probably discuss. But behind this, bellicose response, I think there is kind of a bit of an insecurity. And when he said, "Hey, I'm giving full reign to the military," he said the same thing in 2019. This is kind of like you just say it to say it. Like it
Hmm.
just means, hey, we're geared and ready for war. That being said, and man, we could really deep dive into this. He is going to give like a free hand to the military, but what it's really dependent on, and this is again, we need to refer back to 2019, the Indian public needs to be able to take Indian losses. And what I mean by that is in 2019, one of the reasons Modi didn't escalate after like the pilot return is because if you went onto Indian media or Indian social media, people were like, it was like an apocalypse, like, oh, this guy got captured, the world is ending, blah, blah, blah. When you really think about it, this is a soldier in the line of duty. I mean, these things happen. But at that point, there was a lot of pressure on Modi and from the government, on the government, from the people to get this guy back safe. Uh, the alternative would have been, hey, he stays in Pakistan and the military operations escalate. Whatever happens to him happens. I think this time around, though, there's that fear that the Indian public will be squeamish. But from what I've seen, this happened again. This kind of shows the ineptitude of the Indian forces. I'm just going to be really honest. But there's a border security force who was actually captured a few days ago by Pakistan. I think because he went under a tree on like a undemarcated land to like for shade, and then he just got captured. You haven't really heard much news about that, which is a good sign for India. If this happened in 2019, there might be all these candlelit marches of this guy coming back. But I think the Indian government has put a whip on the media to be like, hey, you guys can't do this. So there is starting to be a line blurred in between, like, hey, how do you conduct yourself in these times of war, XYZ? There's been pretty much nothing on the sky. It was announced at the time, and now that's that. So I think the public is different versus 2019, but this facet that Modi does not trust the Indian military to that degree, I think is missed by a lot of people.
Is there any currency to the notion that India did so poorly in 2019 that Modi has spent the last 6 years trying to fix things, and that this is an opportunity to test their capabilities in I mean, I won't say a low stakes way because these are two nuclear powers and maybe there are other political like goals that he's trying to push through. But is this a test? I mean, I might sound like a conspiratorial Pakistani official now, where I'm like, well, maybe the Indians want an excuse to play with their army and see what they can do in Kashmir. But is there any currency to that notion that it's a way to try and strengthen the military in the eyes of the Indian population in response to a fairly grisly and very anti-Hindu attack?
No, I think that's because you have to kind of go into domestic politics here. Modi and the military don't see eye to eye on a number of reforms that he wants to conduct in the military. For example, I think there's one reform, I'll kind of simplify it, where he wants to institute like these, they call them like Agniveers, I think. Basically, he wants to institute people coming into the military, training or serving for like 4 to 5 years, and then being out. Basically, he wants to reduce the size of the forces. He wants to make it more lean. He wants to make it rely more on, say, technology and new procurements and things like that. But when it comes to a lot of military men, it's like, hey, no, we need this type of equipment. We need to buy from these guys who have lobbied me for the past 7 years. We need to recruit X amount of people because these people come from my ethnic group or my caste group, so they need jobs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like these internal elements that happen between yes, this government is very nationalistic, like it's definitely a nationalistic government, but it does not see eye to eye with the military. So I don't think it's a situation where he wants to experiment with the military's prestige. That being said, there's some areas where the military improved, I'm sure. There's some areas where it's lagging behind a lot. But what it's going to be when it comes to conflict in a prolonged war, I think India is obviously going to win, but they have to be able to eat economic and personnel losses. Let's see how long that lasts. I think Pakistanis have a much more bigger appetite to do that, but for them, they don't have much to lose. India is just like it's the fastest growing economy or fastest growing major economy in the world. There's a lot of promise in the country in terms of its economics and its growth story. That's not there for Pakistan. So in a long-term war or long-term conflict, I think it's dependent on India being able to eat losses and then it's going to win. In a short-term conflict, I mean, I think it's heads or tails. Like, I don't know who comes out on top at that point.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a somewhat silly question as a way to try and back into some of this context. And we do have to talk about the water treaty too, because that's one of the weird not idiosyncrasies, but it's strange. It's strange that the water treaty has been suspended in this context. But I'll give you a little view, listeners, of Jacob as a high school student. I've been a contrarian ever since those days. I remember we had it was right around the time that there was problems. I think it was that terrorist attack in Chechnya with the theater where they bombed the theater. I forget exactly what it was, but something was going on with Russia and Chechnya. And at my high school, we had these town halls where sometimes we would discuss things that were going on in the news. And precocious young Jacob, at this point, I think I was a sophomore, like raised his hand in the town hall and said, I don't get the big deal. Like, why don't they just like let Chechnya be independent? And there was actually one of my teachers at the school was from former Soviet Union, was Russian. She was teaching now in our school. She got like very offended by my question and like yelled at me afterwards and said I didn't know what I was talking about and I shouldn't say such things. I didn't know shit about Chechnya at the time. I was more interested in biology at that point in my life. Anyway. With that in mind, I'm gonna inhabit Jacob the high schooler for a second here and be a sort of a talisman for my listeners and ask, why does India want Kashmir? Like it's majority Muslim. Like why? Like what is it worth the trouble? Like is there something that India is getting from Kashmir that is worth fighting for? That you're willing to sustain the losses for? I know the statistics are hard to come by, and it depends. Like is it this Kashmir these divisions, or is it this region? Like there's all sorts of complexity. We can go into that later. But roughly 60 to 70% Muslim, roughly 20 to 30% Hindu. Not a historically, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say not historically because things have changed hands so many
Yeah.
times. You could probably make the argument, but like, what is the big deal about Kashmir? Why is Kashmir? Why is a majority Muslim region occupying so much headspace in the Modi government and in the minds of his supporters?
So I think from the basic sense, like a nation just doesn't want to lose territory. And in 1947, when you had partition and Indian independence and Pakistan independence, all these princely states of India, there's hundreds of them, they had a choice to accede to Pakistan, India, or remain independent. At that time, the person who ruled Kashmir, he was a Hindu prince, actually, Hindu king. There was a minority Hindu population, majority Muslim, and he kind of twiddled his thumbs and he was like, I might remain independent. But at that time, communal violence started to flare up all across, India and Pakistan, but especially along those border regions. So you started to see this communal violence in Kashmir itself between Hindus and Muslims. And then at that time, Pakistan, this was a country for Muslims by Muslims. But India officially declared itself secular. It did not say we are a country for Hindus, we're a country for all people. And Gandhi and Nehru, especially these leaders of India, they were ardent about this. They were like idealistic, romantic, like this was in their life and their blood. Like they really truly believed in this. And this is how it came about in terms of their policies and how they crafted the Indian state. So for India, it was basically like, okay, they waited and they watched, and they let this guy stay independent for a while until Pakistan sent these irregulars, people from actually, funny enough, from the Pashtun regions and from this northern Pakistan region. They sent them in as militiamen, and they started to basically function as a military. So they basically invaded the land. Now, at that point, the king of Kashmir, his name was Hari Singh. Hari Singh kind of freaked out and he acceded to India. And India sent in their army. And at that point, the war was fought, and then and then Kashmir itself it was partitioned. Okay, that's the end of that. Like it's partitioned, and Pakistan owns one part, India owns another. They both say they own all of it, but this is the geopolitical reality. So that's one. I think the
Mm-hmm.
basic idea of, hey, a nation just doesn't want to lose territory. The second idea is, uh, let's say, civilizational. I think there's three main things, but the second idea is civilizational. For India, Kashmir is mentioned in its most ancient scriptures, and it's had a long history in terms of being part of this Indian civilization. This idea of Kashmir being a place of Indian or Hindu or Buddhist philosophy, these great Indian kingdoms that spread out across the rest of Southern Asia, the subcontinent. So there's a lot of civilizational ties. People go there for pilgrimage and things like that. So it has like a religious significance for a lot of Hindus, or just this idea of India in general. And that's where this terrorist attack especially kind of flares up, because it was definitely religiously motivated, and it was also in a place where in 1990, as well as previous times, but 1990 I think was the final straw, basically, where the
Mm-hmm.
Hindus of Kashmir were cleansed. All like 99% of them left at that point. They were already a minority, but at that point they were driven out. It was basically like convert, die, or flee. So there's always this like, communal idea when it comes to Kashmir, and this wound, this open wound that's always been there. The third reason I think is a lot more interesting, and it's Kashmir as a secular idea. Now, imagine India, which is a secular nation. It has around like probably 15% Muslims right now, a bunch of other minorities as well. When you see the one Muslim majority state, say if it seceded or if it exited the Indian Union, what does that mean for secularism in India? what's the point of secularism in India? If that, experiment of secularism that you wanted this minority province to live and be a part of you, if it exits this, experiment of secularism, what does that mean for Indian secularism? So through these, I think, three main ideas of just like territory, a civilizational idea, and even a secular idea, I think those are the main reasons that India wants Kashmir. You brought up a kind of a one good point that's related to the first point of territory. The
Hmm.
Kashmir itself is a small vale. It's basically a valley. When you look at the whole map of it and you only compare that sliver of Kashmir, it's not that big. There's other parts of the Kashmir province like Jammu, Ladakh, Leh, Kargil, Gilgit, Baltistan. This area is so mountainous, and if you know like other mountainous areas, like say Lebanon or any areas where you see a lot of these valleys, you have all these different ethnic groups that have lived kind of in relative isolation for a very long time. So in that way, it's also kind of complex in terms of, hey, if this one valley is causing a lot of trouble, does that mean we should give away all of this other territory and all these other people? So
Hmm.
I think those are kind of the Indian ideas when it comes to Kashmir.
It's a particularly beautiful place too. I mean, I've never been there, but if you look at the pictures, it's like starkly beautiful. I think when we think of, or at least when the typical American thinks of, this part of the world, they're probably thinking of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan or further afield in the Middle East and Iraq, and this is not that. Like this is beautiful mountains and pine forests and glaciers and sort of everything else. Um, okay. Let's maybe back into the water conversation because, in some ways, geopolitically, this is what's most interesting to me. Both Pakistan and India are very water stressed countries. Pakistan, one of the most water stressed countries in the world, per capita water availability is below 1,000 cubic meters. That's generally the threshold that most international organizations use to calculate scarcity. About 90% of their agriculture depends on water from the Indus River system. So when we say the Indus Waters Treaty is being suspended, like we're talking about an existential challenge to Pakistan's ability to feed itself, to actually function. India is not in a much better condition. I think I saw one statistic, more than 60% of Indian districts are water stressed. People might remember just a year or two ago, major water shortages in cities like Chennai sort of being in the news to a great extent. India has also been very bad at conserving the water resources that it does have. It's using up its groundwater rapidly. I won't say most, but lots of the rivers in India are disgustingly polluted. I watched a documentary on this actually just the other day on Netflix about like just how gross some of the rivers are. Like some of the rivers are biologically dead because they are so polluted. It's disgusting. And if you extrapolate population growth for both India and Pakistan, 10, 15 years from now, we're talking about hundreds of millions of more people in geographies that are already significantly water stressed. India in particular, you're talking about 16% of global population. It has something like 5% of global fresh water supplies. And that's before we even get into the monsoon cycle and how that's changing because of climate change, everything else. All of which is to say, I sort of alluded to this, but let's put a finer point on it. I mean, all of the different wars that have happened in India and between Pakistan and India, I mean, you've got multiples of them. I mean, so here's just a list of some of the conflicts that we've seen in recent memory. You had a war in 1965. You had a war in 1971. You had the Kargil War around 1999. The Indus Water Treaty itself, of course, comes out of the war around partition in 47 and 48. Water was a big problem in that war, and competition and fighting over water happened, and you get this treaty signed in 1960. There have been threats to suspend the treaty before from the Indian side. I found one quote from Modi saying in 2016 in relation to something that happened that blood and water can't flow together. That's a really nice quote from Modi. So explain or take that in any direction you want. Do you want to talk a little bit more about water? Do you want to talk about why you think India is choosing to go after the Indus Waters Treaty now? Because it seems to me if you're going to go after water, even just not just rhetorically, like they're actually suspending things. They've gone after it rhetorically before. You're upping the ante here with Pakistan because you're challenging literally the ability of Pakistan to exist as a country. Like we're no longer talking about the line of control and pot shots and, people wandering into demarcated zones. You're talking about the ability of Pakistan to actually feed its hundreds of millions of people. So why go after such a hot button issue and a treaty that honestly has been like something that people refer to all the time. But, oh, well, you don't have water conflicts because water is so serious that even mortal enemies like Pakistan and India will make nice about this so that they could both have access to water. Take that any direction you want.
Sure. I think in terms of water stress, we should plug your earlier podcast. I think we had because we talked a bit about agriculture and the farm laws. This is kind of related to that. To be honest, am not too worried about India's side in terms of the water stress. It seems like the monsoons they address a lot of it. However, when it comes to this Indus Water Treaty and how that's kind of related, some places that are really water stressed in India are these northern sections, actually, like Punjab, Haryana, and these places that are, this is where the Indus runs through and these river systems run through. So they're water stressed because they plant a lot of crops that are water intensive. And that's because of, kind of these bad agricultural subsidies and XYZ. We kind of discussed in our last podcast, which people should listen to. But anyways, in terms of why did they suspend the treaty, a lot of this, as I said, I think is Modi's. He's just not as confident in the military to just carry out, regular military operations. I think this gives India a lot of leverage. And from what I've been doing in terms of reading, they've been kind of preparing for this. They have, I think the water minister announced they have short, medium, and long term plans. They already have some dams in place. They already have some reservoirs in place. They have canals in place. It would be politically advantageous for them to reroute some stuff into these water stressed areas in northern India. And obviously, geopolitically very advantageous in that scenario. So I think if we game theory here, say they stop, and from some reports I've heard they've started to fill up some reservoirs and divert some water. I've seen some screenshots and stuff. So it seems like some of it has started. What happens when they start doing this? I think that invites, a Pakistani attack essentially. Like I get the perspective of Pakistanis where it's like, this is war. Like you're diverting our water. I saw a report in Reuters recently where they were interviewing some farmers in Pakistan, and they're very scared. They're 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 terrified, and this puts domestic stress too. I remember early in the podcast I told you about this idea that it's Punjab or these Punjabis who really control Pakistan. Punjab is the first province that tastes the Indus in a lot of cases. So Punjab takes up a lot of Indus water. Recently, there's been protests in places like Sindh, which is in southern Pakistan, let alone Balochistan, which is basically like a desert, or these northwest provinces. So for India, there's a lot of almost like psychological warfare here and, geological warfare where, hey, we're not only going to stop giving you water, but what's the consequences of that? It's not just, hey, you have less food. It's your people are going to put more pressure onto your leadership and onto your military. These periphery regions are going to be more pissed off at Punjabis. And I know this is a very direct strategy because there's a guy, his name is Siddhant Sibal on Twitter. He communicates a lot of quasi government official stuff. And there's a sources thing he just tweeted out today where it's like, the Pakistani military is very concerned because they think a lot of these regions are rebelling against the Punjabi army or the Punjabi centricism and stuff like that. So this is a very deliberate ploy to agitate these, periphery regions of Pakistan to make it seem like, oh, Punjab is taking all the water and you have even more little water now and they're not sharing. So it's like this whole strategy to not engage in super direct military conflict, but rather invite it. And I think India is a lot more comfortable with Pakistan being more aggressive and then them, reacting in whichever way they would. I actually think since since they're less comfortable with sending people into Pakistan, they might do other things like I don't know, like artillery or even missiles. But they want to kind of invite Pakistani aggression via these moves and do a lot of internal, I think, rambling.
That's a pretty grim assessment. Well, what do you think is going to happen next then? So, like I said we're recording, April 30th in the morning. Pakistan has warned that it's expecting some kind of military action itself in the next 24 to 36 hours. But where do you think this goes from here? Do you think it's a contained skirmish? Is it going to be an actual war? Like, how are you assessing sort of what's going to happen next?
From what I've seen, I don't want to let my bias, come out here, but I'm just going to tell you how I feel. Um, Pakistan did a 2 a.m. presser. It just did another presser, I think, an hour ago. It's kind of it's kind of being schizophrenic in a way in terms of its messaging, and it's scared. Like you don't do a presser at 2 a.m. unless you're scared of something. Um, and seeing these reports of the people being scared about what's happening with the Indus, their economic troubles, the rebels, and everything, I think India wants to play this slow. And I think for India's point of view, that is the right way to do it. One of the first things they did after this attack was they seemed to contact all these, they did a diplomatic outreach very, very quickly. I think they want to build almost a consensus to screw over Pakistan, or at least, make people look the other way, make other countries look the other way. Now I know you'll always hear these platitudes of, oh, we want India and Pakistan to not go to war or cool tensions, but at the end of the day, I think from what I've seen on the Indian side, there's been a lot of meetings across the realm in terms of the finance minister, the water minister. Uh, Obviously, Modi's meeting with all the military. He's meeting with all these different officials, almost like a full spectrum activation of every part of India to gear up for a conflict and gear up for a significant conflict. That doesn't mean it's going to be, India is going to send like tanks in immediately or anything like that within the next 24 36 hours. But I think India is going to, manipulate those waters, and they're going to try to do a lot of economic damage to Pakistan, try to rile up these internal fissures. Um, I think they're very serious against Pakistan. I don't know when it comes to what type of military action they'll do. But I think it's going to be bigger than 2019 when they do it, because there's a lot of appetite for it in the Indian audience now. Like I said, the Indians don't seem as squeamish as they were in 2019. For whatever reason, they seem a lot more confident. Um, and when I say confident, not just in military capabilities, but confident in the ability to, take those hits or stomach those consequences of war. Uh, you know, then again, it is like it's online stuff. People are, in the moment. But it does seem like a kind of a different Indian approach than 2019, where it was a lot more reactionary. This seems like a lot more slow burn and something they've probably thought of for a while, especially when it comes to this water treaty.
Okay, well that leads to two necessary questions then. The first is I imagine that it wouldn't be so hard to build a consensus against Pakistan globally, but there are two countries in particular that you would need to have on your side if you wanted to do this. Number one is China. Number two is probably Saudi Arabia. Um, so where do you think India famously just a couple of months ago put to bed, not put to bed, but de-escalated the last border crisis it had with China. And China, by the way, also involved in this region, like has a little
Yeah.
section of it that some maps of Kashmir would call that as well. And Pakistan, China has been a major supporter of Pakistan, building infrastructure, all those other sorts of things. So China has reached out to China in recent months. They've de-escalated their border conflict together. It looks like things have been actually going a little bit better there. Do you think that India is able to get China on its side or to look the other way? And how is Pakistan going to look at that? And then the Saudis, the Saudis have always propped up the Pakistanis, thought of them as, maybe military muscle in the long run if they needed help, and they, provide helicopter money like they do for lots of different nations in the Middle East and even in South Asia. India is a major oil buyer, so maybe there's some leverage there. But talk to me about specifically how you think India are they able to build consensus or put leverage on countries like China, Saudi Arabia, or others that I'm not thinking of that might come to Pakistan's aid diplomatically?
Yeah, Saudis, I think, is the easiest one here because with the advent of Mohammed bin Salman, he's tussled a lot with these Wahhabis and these extremist groups. And in general, economic ties between India and Saudi Arabia have just blossomed. I think India might be their second biggest trading partner, I believe. I need to double check that. But they have huge economic ties. They're almost close to being allies in a way. I think they have extremely good relations. When Modi visited Saudi Arabia during these attacks, oh, this is actually a really, really good point. Modi was in Saudi Arabia during these attacks. So I don't think the Saudis would take very kindly to that. When Modi came on the Indian Air Force plane or whatever, Saudi Arabia gave him like a, I don't know, almost like a airplane guard of honor, where they sent their jets to escort him to come. So they have extremely good relations, a lot better than with when it comes to Saudi Pakistani relations, especially Salman and Modi, I'd say. So the Saudis, I'm very sure, have not taken kindly to this terror attack during the trip. Modi had to leave the trip in the middle because of it. So I'm sure they'll firmly be in India's corner. China's industry, interesting. You're right that they've de-escalated, but it's very weird. I think it's what's his name? Something Lutwick. Do you know who I'm talking about? Edward Lutwick. He called some
Oh,
geopolitical analyst.
yeah,
He
of
called
course.
Xi Jinping's foreign policy or China's foreign policy strategic autism because they do a lot of things that just don't make sense, or they do a lot of like almost like flip floppy things. They've definitely been reaching out in terms of diplomacy. There are some Indian experts who think that China goaded this attack because they want India to go into a really like open kinetic war and ruin their economic aspects and stop their manufacturing boom or growth story or anything like that. So a lot of Indian strategic experts actually think that. I think that might be true too. There might be an element of that. There might be a bit of duplicitousness here. However, when I see some of the actual policy stuff, the de-escalation thing is real. Recently, the government of India green-lighted some Chinese investment, I think as a junior partner in a certain fields. I forgot exactly which, but I think it's some technological field. So it was kind of a big deal. They're opening themselves up to Chinese investment and stuff. On the other side, Pakistan and China have had strong relations for a long while. I think there's an idea of China being like an iron brother or something. But China's investments in Pakistan haven't turned out well. Part of that is because of this alleged Indian proxy interference in areas like Balochistan and the Northwest Province, or just northern parts of Pakistan, where this, I think in the 2010s, especially in the early 2010s, there was this idea of a Chinese Pakistan economic corridor. It was like the next big thing. It was supposed to transform Pakistan. They were going to do it all along, the spine of Pakistan, much of it in Balochi areas, ending at Gwadar port. Hasn't gone to plan, and a lot of that is because these areas are very restive, and these locals, like I said, there is an element of ethnic resentment, and they feel like this is might be a Punjabi takeover, or they're selling themselves, or they're selling their ethnicity to the Chinese. So the CPEC, it just hasn't panned out. It's been a failure, to be honest. So for China, it is this weird situation where it's like, hey, we know India screwed over this great plan of ours, but we have an opportunity to invest in India and maybe start anew. So China, I have no idea, to be honest. We, like I said, there's so many two sides to this story. Um, so I can't really say. I don't think they would really interfere when it came to Indo-Pakistani conflict, though, especially with America being kind of behind India at this moment pretty openly. I don't think they would want to really interfere very directly.
Okay, and then sort of last question here. So, if this is going to be a slow burn, and if India is serious, I mean, these are two countries both that have nuclear weapons, and water is existential to Pakistan. So I don't think it is hyperbole, or I don't think it's sensationalism to ask, well, if Pakistan really does feel threatened and backed into a corner, and let's say India's diplomatic strategy is successful, and even China is not there to support Pakistan in its moment of need, does Pakistan invoke the failsafe? Does it use the threat? Do we start getting threats of nuclear exchange and things like that? Does that scare you at all, or do you think we're not going to reach that precipice?
I don't think we're going to reach that. I think India, the Indian government is very responsible. They're usually fairly defensive, especially Modi, especially now that he has a reduced mandate. I don't think he's going to be, too aggressive. So when it comes to that Indus Water Treaty, I think they're going to like do a trickle method where they're not going to, stop everything at once or anything like that. I think they're going to start leveraging it slowly. And when it comes to Pakistan and their nukes, in my mind, and you're more of a geopolitical expert than me, but I think that would be a situation where a lot of world powers would come together, even like America and China, and obviously India, and try to stop that. Um, that's my best guess here. I don't think Pakistan would try to use nuclear weapons because that would that would be the end of Pakistan at that point. I don't think it would exist as a state after, just because it would become a total pariah.
Yeah, the only way I'll push back is that if India did cut off water to Pakistan, that would also be the end of Pakistan.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do a full cutoff, but I think they'll definitely do some types of cutoffs that are going to stress parts of Pakistan.
Yeah, well, then maybe do we start? Vladimir Putin has talked about tactical nukes or those things in the context of the war with Ukraine, and you haven't seen people band together to stop him. So it's a slippery road. I tend to agree with you, but it's one of those things where instead of a 0% chance, we're at a 2% chance, and it's like you going from 0 to 2 on something of that high a magnitude would be terrible. Akshar, thanks. Tell the listeners where they can find more from you. I know we talked about the Emissary a little bit earlier, but tell listeners where they can find more of your work.
Sure. If you want to read my articles, just go to theemissary.co. Do the Emissary Co on Twitter for, I guess, my tweets and some article posts. But if you want to see me on video, which I guess I'm putting a lot more focus on, just type in the Emissary on YouTube. I think now I'm one of the first results. You'll be able to find me pretty easy. But yeah, the Emissary YouTube. Definitely subscribe to me there. Follow me anywhere. And yeah, thanks for having me on, Jacob.
Thanks for coming back on. I'm sure we'll have you on soon. Cheers.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for listening to the Jacob Shapiro podcast. The show is produced and edited by Jacob Smulian, and it's in many ways the Jacob Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. It takes just a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us. Also share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about hiring me to speak at your event, or if you want to learn more about the wealth management services that I offer through Bespoke or at Cognitive Investments, you can find more information at jacobshapiro.com. You can also write to me directly at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'm also on X for now with the handle Jacob Shap. That's Jacob, SHAP, no dats, dashes, or anything else, but I'm not hard to find. See you out there.